I wanted to make a video today about just a lot of ranting stuff on my mind. So one thing I think about a lot, I guess, is the idea or like the reality of I don't know if punishment is the right word, but sort of consequences. And I think about, I question the reality of them. Like, are there really consequences? Because in sort of this postmodern age, I suppose, a lot of people have a persistent sort of disbelief, persistent disregard for things like that. The notion of things having any real significance, or like there being any sort of structure in the universe, or any sort of cause and effect sort of thing. And it makes me question that, myself. And it's like, I think it's because this sort of, I guess, voice of pride, I suppose, that is a very collective force these days. And I should fix this. But yeah, this voice of pride is my really only guess, where you have this sort of persistent disbelief with people when it comes to notions of how to act in the world. Obviously we've all heard at some point or another someone telling you or someone else, don't tell me how to act. Maybe you've said that yourself, or maybe I've said that, don't tell me how to act, don't tell me how to live, don't tell me what to do with my life. And so it's about, I guess, trying to understand the meaning of, like, how to actually act in the world, and if that's something that should be conveyed, because I personally believe that there are definitely different ways to act in the world, and that people can act in ways that are, I suppose, not favorable. Um, there's essentially, like, rule sets that people can choose to follow, and values that people can try to adhere to or aspire to. And there's moral principles, there's insight and guidance and all kinds of things, and there's this idea of the crossroads. It's, a very old idea of the crossroads. It's like, are you choosing, there's the meme image of, like, the haunted house, or like the utopia kingdom, and you're choosing which path to take. And it's and I guess the sort of intuitive sense is that obviously you want to take the path to the kingdom. That's the sort of thing. But there's the downward path to, I guess, destruction, to rock bottom, to tyranny, to confusion and just chaos. And there's a lot of choices I think people can make, and I think there's consequences off of our choices. And I think that saying that alone is highly controversial in a way, or that statement isn't without ob- sort of protest, or I won't say objection, but like, people might protest to that notion of like, if you act a certain way, there's going to be consequences. And like for me, if I cheat on my diet, it's going to be a slippery slope for me to addiction, to living a lie, to like just total confusion, not knowing up from down in a way, like just total ill discernment. And and it might seem weird that just cheating on a diet would lead to total catastrophe, like a downhill like slide, a slippery slope downhill slide thing. But I've experienced that firsthand. I've tested the theory, and it's like it's true every time. And that's why I haven't cheated on my diet in years now. I might have smoked weed or something like that, or like did a small test like years ago where I drank orange juice, and that immediately, like, for those of you that don't know, I only eat meat now. I might eat butter, but I think I cut it out of my diet very recently, actually. But it's just trying to stick to animal products only. More specifically, the more that I just do meat only, the less problems I run into. And so, yeah, I don't do cheese, for example, and I don't even do eggs. I've tried to reintroduce them though, but I just don't do them. And so basically it's like this narrowing of this kind of straight and narrow path. And essentially everyone else in the world, those around me, they don't have this rule that they follow. They haven't given up, eating plants and junk food and stuff like that. And so you kind of, there's like this dynamic where, it's like, so there's a thought line back to Nietzsche where with the death of God, the statement that of the death of God is really sort of the death of I guess culture, in a way, cultural values, the death of value, in a way, like the notion of value, and the age of just insistent skepticism. And then there's the afterthought of Dostoevsky, who made basically the claim that if God is dead, then all is permitted. And it's sort of this thing where it's like, if you don't have principles to guide you, then what guides you? What is your what are the constraints, and what are the what is right and what's wrong, and it's like, and it's pretty much, I think we live in an age really where postmodern ideas have become so the persistent skepticism of value has led to such a state of ill discernment in the world where, it's like, who's to say for sure, that's kind of the general statement. Like, who's to say what's right or wrong. And I can empathize with that position because, it's like, if you know anything, you've been wrong before. And what that means is that, you might think you know something, but then it turns out to not be the case. And, that happens to everyone pretty much. You blurt out an answer in class, you think it's right, and it ends up not being the correct answer. That happens all the time. And so how do we navigate that, and I believe, that we can arrive to more correct answers, and you can choose to learn and dedicate yourself to trying to understand, the correct answer or answers, And I think there's been this motion of dismissal and sort of disregard for even the notion of correct answers. And I think you see it in the universities, from what I understand, from what I've heard, and a little bit of what I've seen firsthand is like, there's this narrative of it's these ideas of what has been traditionally taught in universities. They're from a place of bigotry and racism and maybe imperialism and conquering and sort of they basically this pathologizing of the past or the foundations of what sort of the values of traditional, I guess, rule sets, whether they be religious or simply cultural, with whether that's the Constitution or whether that's what's in the Bible and taught in church and stuff, and sort of that that whole foundation of the domain of ideas and what should we do with them, and there's this idea really that's popular today where it's basically like these ideas, they're just corrupt and they're old ideas. They are we should just abolish them and we should just start completely new and we should create our own thing. And I think there is honestly really great folly in that, because I do believe the past can teach us things. It doesn't make things like the Constitution or even the Bible, dare I say, I think I don't think it makes these texts or ideas, it doesn't make them infallible or something that should be I want to say followed to a T, but I guess what I more so mean is that everything in the Bible or the Constitution, I think, should be taken basically to look at the ideas and to take what is useful from them, and and to just work with that, and the idea that you can even take anything from these things, I think is what really is being considered to be, um, the notion that you can even take anything from the Constitution, I think, is becoming more of a popular position, I guess, in like uh, academia and just online discourse, just in society in general, and that um, this disregard for values, this disregard for rule sets, this disregard for, I guess, ways of living, and um, just disregard in general. And what is what really is like, is that really the thing that is that really the best attitude, I suppose? Is that really the optimal pathway? And my gut reaction is no. This persistent disregard is obviously very problematic. And I think disregard for cultural values in general, it doesn't even have to be Western values, but even Eastern values. And I think it is, there's sort of this movement of ignorance going on in the world today, where I believe it's rooted in postmodernism and really nihilism in general, and basically the convenience of ignorance and not having to take ideas seriously. And is that a folly of society, or is that a folly of the individuals? Um, and I think it's a folly of the individuals largely, and I think that whole societies can go astray and become corrupted, and we've seen that with Nazi Germany, where these totalitarian regimes like the Soviet Union, where there's collective peril. Yes, there's a big movement for collectivization and collective unity, but that can become toxic when the disunity is punished. And what I mean by that is novel ideas, um, outside ideologies, outside perspectives. When So I believe in collective peril. I think that whole societies, when they move in collective motion, they can all move to collective peril together. And basically, like, because it's basically a logical fallacy. Strength in numbers, I think, it can be definitely a logical fallacy. It can be a fault when when it's for the wrong things. Um, because group solidarity in itself is not without its flaws. Um, I think that the mere act of, I guess, consolidation of people in a group is not the modicum of what is highest. Um, I don't think it's the North Star in a way. Like, I think that there's times where the group or the collective, the mob, can go astray, and we need individual sort of, I guess, like, disobedience. in, in such a disobedience to what is wrong, basically. Like, to not follow suit, to not conform with things that are wrong. And, if everyone is out in the streets creating a riot, um, things are chaotic, there's people being attacked, there's violence, it's important to not sort of fall into that whirlwind, that vortex, and I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and that's basically the moral of the book, is what I gleaned from that, reading that, where even the Jews would fight amongst each other for scraps of bread. The people in the concentration camps. Viktor Frankl, he was in the camps himself. He was an occupant. So he was facing the same material conditions as everyone else there. He was starving as well. And so, but he didn't lower himself to fighting over bread, to cheating out of other people out of their piece of bread so he could get it, stealing, that kind of stuff. He tried to keep sort of a moral integrity about himself despite the sort of survival circumstances. And that, to me, was kind of like a North Star moment for me. It was like, I don't want to fight over bread. And you can actually see that sort of behavior today in the right places, if and I mean, when COVID happened, that was basically to a T sort of what was happening, and people weren't even starving. People are like obese, but they're fighting over like toilet paper, and it's sort of that mob frenzy that people almost give themselves up to, and it's like a form of possession. It's sort of the abdication or like giving up of personal responsibility. It's thinking that blending in with zebras, it's like trying to become part of the mob is like, it's kind of like a form of camouflage. It's a way of trying to evade personal responsibility, because, everyone else is doing it, and it's one of the weakest excuses out there, honestly. And I think the mob is used as a cover for psychopaths and things like that to commit some of the worst atrocities, like rape and things like that, and so they use that as cover, and people see it through a very opportunistic and capitalistic lens, where the excitement of joining the mob in the streets is sort of a way of shielding yourself, or like cloaking yourself, so that you may pounce at an opportunity of like maybe stealing from a shop, or taking advantage of someone, or hurting someone, or throwing bricks at cop cars, and just getting away, trying to get away. It's seen as this way of like getting away with crime to it, because it's ultimately like a delusion. I mean, sure, I could imagine some people get away for some time, but I mean, like, people have to live with that, and I do think that people don't get away with anything just because supernatural beliefs, and the belief that everyone gets judged and all that. I don't think people get away with anything, and yeah, and I think people have a way of deluding themselves into thinking that they can, in a very sort of narcissistic way, and because they blind themselves just enough to obfuscate themselves. Sorry, Obfusc- that's a difficult word to say. Basically, to blur their own perceptions just enough to where, they don't see the truth that, you know, they can't get away with things. And but people will do what they can to sort of believe that they can, I guess, or yeah. And I don't know, you just have sort of this okay, so I think a lot about World War II and Nazism, and like maybe what it might have been like during World War II, being in World War II Germany, during the rise of Nazism, and what that might have been like, and then I see the world today, and it's like I honestly draw parallels. I think that sort of the collective hysteria is like and sort of the collective witch hunting too, like that is like the paramount thing of a lot of people these days, is this idea of being like a bounty hunter. It's like it's like people throw away everything else about their lives except for this, to be a bounty hunter or whatever, witch hunter. um Whether that's the hatred of Jews or Israelis, this term of Zionism, and things like that. I think that there's definitely wrongdoing on, I guess, both sides of the political spectrum. And like I said, I think it really comes down to the individuals at the end of the day. And but I mean, you see scapegoating. You see a lot of historical tropes sort of resurging in the modern times. You see this rise of communism, this sort of fixation on power. A lot of people obviously want power these days. They want to be the ones in power, and I think that's very short-sighted in a way, because I mean, there's almost a grandiose fantasy of totalitarian leaders, I think, or like this totalitarian mentality of like, if someone rises to power and they exercise their power enough in force that they can keep themselves innocent, you kill all the judges, you kill all the police, you make yourself the police, you make yourself the judge, and you establish your own rule, and the thing is like people like Stalin and Hitler, Hitler is a really great example because he couldn't outrun his sort of judgment in a way. He killed himself in the end as everything was falling apart around him. And in some ways, I think the same about Stalin. He died, I guess, of natural causes, but I mean, I still I still think, the collapse of the USSR and the reforming of their government and stuff like that. There's a lot of they, as far as I know, I think they almost had their own form of like trials that they had with their people in government, and yeah, I just think that like in the Soviet Union, the the sort of the struggle for power and how um, there's many people who were in power positions who were sent to the gulags and all of that, who were executed, and it's sort of sad to see that people are trying to replicate this today, where it's like a puritanical movement where all these narcissist individuals who think that they're going to be the top dog, essentially, that they're going to be the one to like call the plays, and the reality is that this puritanicism of whether or not people fit the cookie cutter mold or whatever, the no true Scotsman fallacy of like I it's always, they always think themselves as the perfect thing to fit through the perfect sort of hoops that they design to jump through. Like they design their own hoops to jump through, and no one else is like, it's like um these are sort of incomplete ideas, but it's just this sort of you create this mold of what a good person is supposed to be, and you make it so narrow that other people can't fit through it, and that and it's in such a way that only you are the one who passes your own purity test, sort of thing. And there's a lot of people like that out there right now, and all their purity tests are incompatible with each other's, so they can't pass the purity test of their own comrades, and you create this very psycho situation where of purity testing everyone around you, and facing purity tests yourself, and who's the most orthodox communist, and all of that, who's secretly like a Mossad agent, and it's sort of it's called infighting. They fight amongst themselves, and I just think the way that things are going right now, I do think that love wins, and that ultimately Earth will get reclaimed by love and all of that, and but in the meantime, it's just sort of like, man, it's sort of wild to see that people are trying to run this experiment, and they believe they can have like some eternal rule and avoid consequences forever, and it's just, I don't think they can, honestly, and I think in a lot of ways you can learn from consequences, and there's a right and a wrong time, I think, for consequences too. Like people in Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany, they'd be the type to just beat their farm animal to death for not producing enough milk or some shit like that, and It's like, or not behaving properly, and it's that mentality of like such a puritanical view of like not allowing grace that um it creates this sort of control freak mentality of things have to be such a specific way, and if they're not that way, that you have to punish them to try to reform them to make them fit back into your mold. And like and the thing is like it doesn't always work how you expect it to. There's see most people in the Soviet Union who were tortured to give false confessionals about confessing other people's names as traitors and saboteurs of the state who really weren't and had nothing to do with it. So people were lying to because they were getting tortured because the Soviets wanted to fulfill a quota for, everyone's all these bad people are messing up the state. We have to deal with them, and things aren't getting better. So we have to double down on eliminating these sabotaging elements, and it's just it's this downward spiral of like it's like never enough, and so people would lie to try to get out of it. The people would really try to do anything to get out of the punishment, and I think that's the thing that they kind of wanted, was like they wanted that conformity to make them feel like maybe they're doing something right. It's like holding a female at gunpoint to kiss you. It's like a weird thing that people will try to do for affirmation, to make them feel like everything is okay, like they're the good guys. But obviously it's wrong, and a lot of people lied to try to escape torture and things like that, and I think there's a time when that sort of punitive coercion should be resisted, and that people shouldn't lie, actually. And that's probably easier said than done. But I think we've come to that as a society today, where people lie because they want favor, and it's like trying to seek favor from a tyrant so you can seek shelter under their wings. And it's just a very toxic. I mean, talk about bootlicking and kissing feet. It's like, people are doing many acts these days. Like you see in the UK, they're just almost giving their women and children up to like almost as like a welcome gift in a way, so that these coward men could just not be so that they could, I don't know, somehow gain favor from these people who are basically like invading their country, that sort of thing. And it's sort of like it's a weird thing, they're trying to sweeten them up so that they don't get so that they have sweeten up their own treatment, I suppose. And it's sort of this cowardly spinelessness that I believe that you're seeing these days, especially like in the UK and in Europe, where their governments are no longer prosecuting criminals, and it's just they're just letting them off free, that kind of thing. Like they don't want any problems, just let them go. And it's just a weird thing because now their law system is pretty much corrupted and that no one is taking their laws seriously anymore. And yeah, it's I really do believe there can be like criminal rule of government. That's when like the criminals have the power pretty much. And I believe power dynamics can flip, and that the wrong people can be in positions of power and tyrannies can come about. And it's like that's when you're being dictated, when people are trying to dictate you on like how to act, but in ways that are pathological and arbitrary and unauthentic, in ways that are not authentic, and in ways that are coerced, and ways that are disingenuous, and ways that are lies ultimately. And I believe that's the power individuals have, is to resist coercion, to resist lying, to resist being disingenuous, to resist lying to people and telling them simply what they want to hear just so they'll leave you alone. Sometimes, like, you think that'll just alleviate the problem. You think lying to people, like, tell them what they want to hear, will just... No. It doesn't. I know people who, like, maybe they'll ask me if I want to hang out with them. And, like, honestly, how I feel is, like, no, I don't, And a lot of people, I know who I would have been years ago and what I would have responded to that. I would have probably been like, like, sure, let's do something. But, I would have felt like it was disingenuous, and I don't want to waste people's time. Now I don't want to waste people's time and lie to them and, be fake to them. I think that's worse. Being fake to people, I think that's actually worse. And, yeah. So, and I think it's getting to a point in society right now where a lot of people struggle with discernment. A lot of people struggle with, I guess, knowing right from wrong and that kind of stuff, or what's best, and you hear all these things from people and you don't really know what's true. And I mean, we hear it with like diet advice, that people say, eat a balanced diet, eat your vegetables. I mean, it sounds really good on paper, honestly, but for me, if I eat vegetables, I'll end up a poly drug addict. And that might sound ridiculous, but that's the truth. I mean, that's really what will happen. And it'll happen unless I switch back to only eating meat, and that's the thing. It's like, there's things people can say that we think are good, but are actually extremely problematic, and it's we have to assess old ideas. I mean, there's old ideas that obviously have been pretty much reformed and like disproven, but a lot of people haven't really like caught up or recognized those ideas. I mean, like old wives' tales, things like that, and things that have simply been disproven. But people, they haven't got the memo. And so I wonder about change, and who changes and who doesn't, who reforms themselves and who doesn't. And I think about Nazi Germany, and like, I think about the trials that they had with the name of the trials escapes me for whatever reason right now, but they were questioned and tried about their involvement in the regime and in their current positions about what they think about the Nazi party, And a lot of people were blind loyalists. They were dedicated to the bitter end, to the regime, and they went down in flames. And like it's like, they didn't reform themselves. They didn't account for the atrocities properly. They didn't acknowledge the wrong of the Nazi German party. Um, they didn't acknowledge the atrocities, or maybe they did. They said they deserved it, and basically it was this allegiance to Hitler, which was actually ultimately pathological, that made people disregard the truth because they swore their allegiance to Hitler and not the truth. And that was the ultimate crux that led to the demise of much of the people of the Nazi German party. And that's the thing, that's kind of sort of an extreme example of people that don't change, people that don't reform themselves, and who wouldn't renounce or denounce the Nazi party, and who they didn't sort of integrate back into society in a way. And because of that, a lot of them were tried, executed, and so forth, and jailed and imprisoned. And so it's like, okay, that's sort of a sample of the unreformed and what happens with that. What about the reformed? Oskar Schindler, he ended up getting buried in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. And Oskar Schindler, though he was a member of the Nazi Party, he's largely considered a hero, that he saved many Jews because he employed them in his factories and kept them from executions that way. And it was the way in which he acted and operated. He was more corrigible. It seemed like he had a conscience about him. It's like when everyone else is doing the wrong shit, he was trying to do the right things. And that was, in the snapshot of Nazi Germany, in the sort of narrow lens of, you take not the state, and how the state operated and how everyone else operated. He was unconforming. He was not a conformist to the Nazi Party. And for that, he was redeemable. He was not executed during the trials of the Nazis. And there's other examples of that. There's people who were executed by the Nazi Party during their rule because, like, they were officers who would not follow orders and things like that, and so they were executed. And it's like, those are sort of the forgotten heroes, I think, of history. And so they did not obey, and that is seen as like a capital crime, as to how could someone not obey. It's like, that's, in some sense, it's seen as like the highest virtue to just obey everything. But I mean, I think there comes a time when I don't know, I don't think that's the case. I think not executing Jews in a firing squad is actually the correct move. And and that may seem like an obvious answer to people, like, yeah, don't kill Jews, that's bad, you know. It may seem like an obvious answer, and it is really, but uh, I don't want to downplay the the complexities of being in a situation where your peers are all doing something, and you choose to not take part in it. When your state, your government, when your people are in unity and collective harmony with committing atrocities and lying, and when it becomes sort of the meme, or like the what's in season, the popular talking points, the favorable positions within the corrupted state, the it's like the purity test of, like, are you aligned with Hitler? Are you in and that's sort of the thing where you are you really willing to risk becoming a sort of rebel rouser, of the state, and being an unconformist? Are you really willing to put your occupation of being an officer or a person in government, or like a salaried employee of the state, or even in general, because of because what the contract of the employment and what that entails, and, like, are you willing to give up the salary, so that way you're not the one who's throwing bodies on a cart and building trenches to bury bodies, and to be the one to burn the bodies, and to not be the one executing people, pregnant mothers in a field, that kind of thing. And people these days, they're so quick to claim virtue that obviously you kill Nazis, they're all bad, and that, like, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would have just started blasting, but it's like, I really don't believe people when they say things like that. I don't really believe people. I really don't believe people would have, like, been the hero of the story. Like, genuinely, I don't think they would have. I think that most people, you threaten their salary, you threaten their job, they're not going to be able to give it up. They're going to say, oh, it's for a job. And yeah, I just think that or people to risk their reputations, even a marriage, a friendship, like I think that it's like, are people capable? Are people even willing to make those sorts of sacrifices? Are people willing to give up a job? Are people willing to give up a relationship? Are people willing to give up their position of power? Are people willing to, I mean, their home, their wealth, to put their wealth at stake, their home, their property, maybe their family, like, it was all of that, and like, imagine, like, you're given a choice. Okay, do you execute people, or do you risk your family all getting executed, and that's where we're kind of getting to more so the reality of that difficult dynamic that pretty much most people in the Nazi German state failed, where they didn't make the proper choices, because people would lie in order to try to protect themselves and other people, and that may seem like a heroic thing, but I mean, that then you might end up being the person who's doing the executing, so it's like, that's not heroic. That makes you a Nazi at that point, and you're trying to spare other people, so you're executing strangers, and that's where people fail, because they're not willing to tell the truth and say no when it's necessary, and that's when the choice isn't as casual as people may make it out to be, and so I don't know. I believe that just telling the truth and not lying is genuinely the dynamic that led, the fact that people wouldn't tell the truth and would lie instead actually led to the proliferation of the tyrannical state of Nazi Germany, and like the Soviet Union and other tyrannical states. It's because people failed to be genuine and authentic, and it made it escalate to that point where those sorts of decisions became the sort of crossroads. And yeah, and so people claim very conveniently that they would have been the good guy at every crossroads in Nazi Germany. And I think those people really lack an understanding of, those situations, those crossroad decisions where people have to pick a poison. And yeah. And I just believe in the trust of, telling the truth, and that, what happens. And like, and that it'll be the better outcome. And it's a matter of like appropriately telling the truth too. It's not really like um because the truth in a lot of ways can be like nakedness. So it's really about when it's appropriate and like the proper alignment of when truth is necessary. and and it's kind of like also you don't want to give pearls before swine. And that, I think the truth can be like that too. So sometimes, you gotta to sort of to not give out those pearls so much. And yeah, um people will talk about the scenario of like, you know w- what would you do if you were taking care of like a Jew or someone like that. What would you do if you had Anne Frank in your secret room compartment or whatever? I forget what it was exactly that where she was at. It was like a basement or attic or like a secret pantry. It was like a pantry or something. I don't know. And it's like, what would you do if you had Anne Frank and they're questioning? Would you rat her out? Would you tell them that she was in there? And that is genuinely like that's kind of a problem that is like, you know many people would just very quickly just lie, and say of course not and all of that. And um and it's not like I would just give that information out, you know but it's I don't know if I could really say anything, because I just don't want to lie, you know because for me, I believe lying is the sole reason all of it is happening. So like, yeah, I would be I think I would really struggle to really even say anything. um and I don't know, I just that really is a really strange situation. um and I think a lot of times life can be like that. Like there isn't just a answer ready at hand always, and that's fine, honestly, because I think that some things are often like retrospective problems as well. There's many times in life where you combine experience and you have to kind of look over it and try to um try to think of like how it could have went better. and and I just think that whole situation was very complex. She ended up dying. Anne Frank, they ended up finding her. And that is just that's just I don't know. I mean, in some ways, like, what could you have done even to save her? Because she wasn't even saved in a way, because they found her regardless. And it's like how could that have been prevented in general? And I think it's one of those things where the problem is so massive that, like, it's almost like a systemic thing. um and honestly, that's something I don't really quite have the answers for. I know that it's wrong, but that's about, and I I think it's wrong to play along with the tyranny. I think it's wrong to play, and in some ways, I just believe, the best you can do is just live authentically and live the best you can with the days that you have, and if you live fully, that's what matters. And there's gonna be tyrants, there's gonna be all kinds of stuff, but I mean, um you just got to make the best of the time that you have left, really. And yeah, it that I mean, that just goes to the question, like, how could a Anne Frank been saved in general? And people might think that's weaseling out of the question, but I mean, like, I I don't want to give a lie as an answer, so yeah, that's a that's a that's a drought of a situation, is what how I would describe that. And yeah, people could have did all kinds of things. They could have faked having a heart attack. They could have faked something, and that very well could have just easily given it away as well. And it's like, how do you stop a train when it's hypothetically like 5 feet in front of you? Um, the truth is that she was in that attic, but that's like, I don't know. That's um I, in some ways, I think, like, radical truth in a way is like, you know, because it's not merely that she's in the attic. It's that she's in the attic because the owner, or whoever, the resident, disagreed with disagreed, with that they should be killed. And so it's like, would you stand in front of the party like that? And yeah, that's just a very, I don't know the full story of what happened, if everyone at that house ended up getting killed or what, but yeah. um but I do think it's better to live in truth than to live in lies, and to not fear death, that kind of thing. And people might really, I don't know, have some sort of whimsical reaction to that sort of um, response, but like maybe they think that they would have just solved everything. But yeah. All right. I think I'll end the video here. That's kind of a dark note to end it on, but it just goes to show, I guess, the reality of, things not being always picturesque and fake and all of that, and um, yeah. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments about especially that last part, let me know. It really is something that I think about from time to time, and it's something I I would like to understand, and you know I I'd like to think that there's a better path. Obviously there's got to be some sort of better way, and there's a better way that all of that could have happened, and I'd just like to know. So thank you guys very much for watching. Leave me feedback on these videos. I know not many people are watching these as I'm putting them out, but whatever, it's just there. So thank you guys for watching. Deuces.